I am very excited to be with uh, Qasim Rashid, who is going to introduce himself.
Congressman, it's great to be here. I'm a human rights lawyer based out of the Chicagoland area and passionate about all things justice and human rights. And I think the name of your podcast is so appropriate. So great to be here with you.
Well, thank you, and glad to be here with you on Let's Address This with Kashim Rashid, your program. Um, we've done this only one other time, a joint podcast, and it's a lot of fun because I have a lot of respect for the work that you're doing as a human rights attorney, and there's so much to talk about.
There really is. And, we're in a really volatile place in this nation's history right now. And I've been using a quote that I saw. I can't take credit for it. I wish I could.
Mhm.
But when somebody asks how you're doing, my response now is living the dream, fighting the nightmare, which is kind
Yeah,
of,
that's
kind of
good. I
I think
like that.
where we are. And, we're recording this right after news of Jimmy Kimmel's kind of indefinite suspension.
Yeah.
And the claim from the MAGA right is that, well, this is just what his low ratings warranted or some kind of nonsense. Obviously, it's retaliation for his criticism of Donald Trump. Even if he had ridiculed the tragic killing of Charlie Kirk, that's still protected under First Amendment free speech. But he didn't even do that. He just made fun of Donald Trump, which is basically makes us a democracy, that you can ridicule the president if you want, and it's not offensive. Um, just kind of not even a specific question, but just as a member of
Mhm.
Congress, what do you see when you see the FCC chairman making these ridiculous assertions and these ridiculous kind of fascistic claims, especially when you look at his own tweets under the Biden administration, he
Right.
repeatedly talked about how, hey, we need free speech. We need to be able to criticize the president. We need to be able to criticize the government. And he goes as far as to say that when you see the government censoring speech critical of the government, that's authoritarianism. So they know what they're doing. Kind of broad question, what are your thoughts when you see all this happening?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, this is really stemming off of what happened to Charlie Kirk. Again, we both agree it's terrible. There should never be political violence. We
Yep.
have free speech for a reason. But Charlie Kirk also had some interesting free speech, and as we know, that was pretty, at times, I think, fringy and extreme
Mhm.
on how it talked about lots of different Americans and others. So they're taking this and they're trying to recast him, and they're going after free speech in the guise of supporting free speech. And whether it be what they're doing right now with Jimmy Kimmel, or what they tried to do yesterday to Ilhan Omar. She
Yeah.
didn't even say something, and they wanted to censure her on the floor simply because of who she is. It's a pretty scary time. And I happen to serve on the Financial Services and General Government Subcommittee on the Appropriations Committee, and we have control over the FCC, and we've had him before us before. I wish we would have him before us soon, because I'd like to ask him some of these questions. But the other thing that drives me slightly crazy is uh, Disney is trying to do a merger right now,
Yeah.
and that's a part of this. So him saying what he did, Disney's decided that merger profit is more important than subscriber profit, and we have to remember that as well. So it's just I hate to see these times that we're all going through, and as you said, surviving the nightmare.
And we've seen this playbook before, Congressman, with Stephen Colbert just recently in the
Mhm.
Paramount merger attempt, and Colbert obviously was quite eloquent and is quite eloquent in mocking the president and just mocking satire in general. And I think that's kind of the point, that he didn't go easy on Joe Biden either. He was pretty
Yeah.
critical of Joe Biden all the same, and I think that's really where the hypocrisy and the double standard is showing. I think where it's extremely dangerous is, yes, Jimmy Kimmel should not be indefinitely suspended. Tragically, the hundreds of people that depend on him for a job are now going to suffer the consequences of this reckless decision.
Yeah.
But then you go a step further and you see, I think you probably saw the story that just broke, that Mahmoud Khalil is now flagged
Yes.
for deportation under kind of this kangaroo court decision of, well, maybe he lied on his green card application, which is just, I've been doing immigration law for 15 years now. I've never seen someone who's been a green card holder for this long suddenly have
Yeah.
that accusation. Again, what kind of a message is that sending, and what is your advice to green card holders or to new citizens in general, and how they should navigate these really dangerous kind of uncharted waters in modern America?
Well, and I think, as you know, Donald Trump is trying to send a message. He's it's a very xenophobic, racist message about what America is about, and he's going after certain types of people, in particular, and immigrants. You know, right now seems to be his safe space. He likes to go back to, and that just means people have to be really extra careful. It's sad to see, in my Head Start programs in schools, some kids not going because they're
Yep.
afraid their parents could be picked up, and employers are having to deal with this as an issue. Many farms in Wisconsin have a large immigrant workforce. But this is Donald Trump just appealing to the worst of the worst instincts, right? Racism, xenophobia, and it's his way to have fear control people because that's what he needs to do his agenda. And it's really hard because sometimes I don't have the right words to say to these folks, right? I mean, they're concerned for their just day-to-day survival, and elections have consequences, and they all have to stick together, and we have to stick with the populations that are being attacked, which are many with this administration. But Kasim, it's one of the toughest things because I don't have the right words.
And that's kind of the frustration aspect of it that I think a lot of folks feel.
Mhm.
And my fear, my genuine fear, is that it's going to expand, it's going to get worse. And we're seeing
Yeah.
signs of that. These extrajudicial missile strikes or drone strikes, whatever they are, on these boats from Venezuela,
Yep.
alleging, without any evidence, without a shred of evidence, that they're narcotics carriers. I mean, let's even assume that's true. That doesn't warrant extrajudicial missile strike killing of people. I mean,
Right.
that's third, that's authoritarian, dictator level stuff that's being allowed to continue. And my legitimate fear is that I can see him turning those missiles and drones on American citizens. And my thing is that while some might call that bombastic, I would argue, what reason do we have to believe that this man has any limit on what he's willing to do to maintain power? So I guess the question here is, what can Congress do? Obviously, we need to win the House back in midterms to have some
Mhm.
level of control. But what can Congress do now? We saw Democrats in Texas break quorum and leave the state to send a message and help make the conversation national. And now we're seeing Governor Gavin Newsom get it on Proposition 50 on the ballot to respond back. And that to me is fighting fire with fire. What
Yeah.
can Democrats do in this situation right now to put some, if not a limit, but slow down this destruction that's being committed by the president?
Yeah, part of the problem, as you know, is legislatively we have few tools. You have the discharge petition, which right now we're doing with the Jeffrey Epstein files.
Yep.
We need, I think, one more signature to get to that 218 magic number to force a vote on something. But otherwise, we don't. The majority party controls what goes on the floor of Congress. But we do all have a bully pulpit, and we need to use it far more aggressively than I think people have used it. What I've tried to do, and now I think there's at least 50 members of Congress doing this, is take the conversation to Republican congressional districts,
Mm.
because we've
Yeah.
noticed Republicans have not been doing town halls, largely because they're afraid that the bills they're passing don't aren't in the best interest of their constituents. The
Yep.
big ugly law, in particular around healthcare, education funding, food assistance in particular, have been really bad for people. So, it's to me, I like the common sense values of Wisconsin, which is like, if someone really thought that bill was good, you'd get on the rooftop with a megaphone, right, to scream about it.
Right.
And instead, they're hiding in their basements and they won't do town halls. So when we go to their districts and talk about it, the press come because the members not talking about it, and then we can bring in the people that are affected and tell their stories, and you can do that more than just that bill, right? But I think that's a useful tool that doesn't normally happen. It used to be kind of considered you didn't do that going to someone else's district, but these are anything but normal times.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that really the Progressive Caucus has been behind a lot of these members going to other districts and helping to organize some of those efforts. So that's one thing. What are you seeing? What would you wish that you could see more out of Congress happening? Because trust me, I hear this every day from constituents want more. We do have some limitations, but we're always open for ideas and what else we can do.
Well, I think, you mentioned the Progressive Caucus, and I think one of the frustrations that a lot of folks hold is that the values that the Progressive Caucus is putting forth
Mhm.
are actually shared by the majority of Americans, not just the majority
Right,
of Democrats, but the majority of Americans. Things like
right.
guaranteeing health care as a human right, things like a living wage that isn't, 7.25, something that's probably in the
Hmm.
20 to $25 an hour range. Things like meaningful climate justice, or public safety initiatives that don't involve let's give more money to the police, but
Hmm.
involve investing more in mental health and in public housing and subsidized housing. So one thing I'd love to see is pressure put on the establishment members of our party, to say, hey, as a progressive caucus, we're just not going to play ball anymore because these are issues that aren't just morally correct and logically correct. Guess what? It's what the base of our party wants. Like when 92, I'll give you a very good example, Congressman,
Hmm.
and I know you agree with me on this. 92% of Democrats, they stopped funding Netanyahu.
Yeah.
92%. The UN has acknowledged that it's a genocide. You're one of 16 or 17 members of Congress that have acknowledged the genocide.
Hmm.
But yet, the majority of Democrats are still funded by AIPAC, are still refusing to call this a genocide, are still refusing to say we're going to stop funding Netanyahu. That disconnect, to me, is one that creates just detachment. People don't want to vote. If I even
Yeah.
talk about a politician publicly, the
Hmm.
first question I get across the spectrum is, are they APAC funded? Or what are they said about Palestine? And what are they saying about the economic issues? These are the three
Yeah.
big questions that I get. And if I can't give a solid answer, they're like, I'm not interested. And shame on
Yeah.
you. And that's why I love these interviews, because I can proudly say that Congressman Pocan is at the forefront of these issues. So when you talk about ideas, what would it need to take for the progressive coalition of the Democratic Party to say, listen, we are in an existential crisis right now. You guys aren't fighting the way we need to fight. Here are the demands that we are going to make as a coalition of 30 to 40 members of Congress. You can't do anything without us. We're going to hold the ground if you guys won't.
So it's easier to do that when you have the majority, first of all, because then your demands actually mean something. In the minority, we're just fighting against Republican stuff. So, it is a little different, but we've done that in the past on things like prescription drug pricing and other stuff. We held our votes, and without the votes, they couldn't do things. And we've got the number of people, actually, the number of drugs to renegotiate every year were doubled because of doing just what you're recommending. But right now, what we can do, though, is just go ahead and lead at a time that some people feel like there aren't enough Democrats leading on some of these issues. And I think right now, I've always believed, and I used to print a bumper sticker for my campaign, if the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow.
Yeah.
This is one where, as you just said, 90+% of the people see the genocide that's going on. And you can't unsee it, quite honestly. And that's an issue where, inside the beltway of Washington, these special interests like APAC, a group that um, the best way I can describe it is they're a pro Netanyahu advocacy organization, but they have big dollars and they spend them in primary elections, which is their strategic strength because a primary election, as you know, is much cheaper than a general election. So they can put in a smaller amount of money and essentially try to buy an election. And they've been successful in some cases by outspending significantly people like, you know, the Jamal Bowman or Cory Bush in the last election
Yeah.
cycle. So, I think just not being afraid of them. I mean, I regularly fight with APAC, and I kind of wish they would bring on a challenger because I would love to crush APAC publicly to make a point, right? To
Yeah.
show that you don't have to take their money and you could still have values and wake up in the morning and you don't have to feel like you need a shower all day, right?
Yes.
Because you're doing the right thing for the right reasons. But there's 15,000 lobbyists in Washington. 10% alone for big pharma, which we
Yeah.
could have a whole conversation on that. But on this issue in particular, the good news is there is a growing number of
Yeah.
people who are seeing this because our constituents are. And the best thing I heard, Progressive Caucus this week had a meeting and we talked about this issue. And one of the advocates that was there said, if they are arguing they're going after just Hamas, you could see a few houses taken out, but not 92% of the houses in
Right.
Gaza,
Hmm.
right? And it's
Yeah.
just those kind of points that real people see on TV, but we've got to get the so-called leaders to then also do that hard work.
You're exactly right, Congressman. And a recent report by, I think, a Dutch newspaper interviewed physicians who reported that they treated at least 114 children who had targeted gunshot wounds to the head.
Oh,
Um,
oh,
children, and they have the
yeah,
X-rays and everything. And it's just, you talk about, genocide is hard to prove because of intent. 114 bullets in the heads of
yeah,
children,
yeah,
that's intent. I mean, we put that in perspective because unfortunately in this country we suffer mass shootings. If God forbid, last week there was a mass shooting where somebody put 114 bullets in the heads of children, we wouldn't say, well, they
right.
were going after the one terrorist hiding in the school. We would say, no, this is intentional, and you will get the worst possible punishment imaginable. You are a member of Congress, and
Mm,
you work with people across the aisle. You work with people in an interfaith capacity. You work with people in an intergenerational capacity.
mm.
And you've been unapologetic on calling out this injustice from day one. Walk me through the average voter. Why are you so confident and comfortable on being on the right side of history, but so many others of your colleagues on both sides of the aisle are not? I mean, it's kind of a hard question, I know, but because I'm asking
Yeah.
you to ask for other folks, but what is it about your convictions here that makes you stand firm against all this opposition that you're facing?
Yeah, for me, it depends why you come to public service, and if your value set says that when you come to human rights, it is black or white. There's not a lot of shades of gray, right? It's how do you treat fellow humans and mankind, and doesn't matter where they are on the planet. I have the same response, right? Is that we have to respect everyone, and many I think people do come to Congress with that position. Uh, but we just need to really make this an absolutist issue. I mean, it really is. Like I said, I think it's black and white, not shades of gray. And that means, it means Gaza matters. It means people in Sudan matter. It means, no matter where you are on the planet, we've got to care about that issue. And, people like Jim McGovern really have been one of those kind of mentors. I've watched him far longer than me have this amazing, integrity, but it pays off back home. I mean, if you never have to remember, the lie you told or the bad vote you took for the wrong reason, you could just be as open and honest and genuine and authentic, and that's what people want in their elected officials.
Yeah.
And honestly, I couldn't come to Congress and do things I didn't believe in, right? So I think it's got to be tough for some people who have these tougher districts who think sometimes they got to think through everything. And the people I've seen be the most successful is no matter what your district looks like, if you just vote your values, what you've told your constituents they are, you're better off. People respect that.
I love that. I love that. And you're not just a man of words, you're a man of action. You're one of the lead co-sponsors of the Block the Bombs Act. I'd
Yeah.
love for you to talk about that a little bit for our audience.
Yeah, I mean, this is just saying we shouldn't be sending weapons that can be used offensively to people in Israel. I mean, I know you've been to the West Bank, and I'd love to hear your perspectives as well.
Yeah.
But I've been 3 times to the region. First time I went with APAC. Almost every freshman goes with APAC, right? And I went to see the region, and a lot of what they said didn't make sense. So then the
Mhm.
second time I went with I like to joke the worst named NGO in Washington, the Humpty Dumpty Institute. They go by HDI, but they go into some of the most problematic regions. And we actually had the first ever delegation that I led. It was to Palestine. So we did just really that part of the Middle East. And then the third time I went with J Street, and I think they provide a very balanced kind of perspective often for members who go. But when you see these things, um, you can't unsee them, right? In many cases, and with happening right now, twice I've been denied going into Gaza. And the last member I think who was there was Keith Ellison, which is well over a decade ago. So I had pushed and pushed and pushed, and finally got some language added to the appropriations bill years ago that said any country that gets money had to allow members to have access. And I pushed Israel enough that I got finally permission to go to Gaza after twice I've been denied while in the region, and that was September of 2023,
Wow.
right before October 7th. So they asked for a 3-month window. And I looked at our calendar, and it was between Halloween and the end of January. And then October 7th happened. But, it's been an open air prison. It's something that people have largely just ignored with 2.3 million people. Largely, almost all the water was undrinkable, and, you had to have filtration and all the rest. So, I think when people see that, but, what's important too, and, because I know you spend time in the West Bank, we keep talking about Gaza, Gaza, Gaza. This week we had family members from people who've been killed in the West Bank, American citizens who were Palestinian Americans and others. Uh, so, from your perspective, look at that with the West Bank. I mean, it's something we don't talk about. We didn't talk about Gaza for years, but right now, I think it's equally important we talk about the West Bank.
Completely agree. Completely agree, Congressman. And I didn't know that about your passing that appropriate that condition to the bill. That's fantastic. This is, this is an example of what I mean when I say you're a man of action, because now we're talking about meaningful accountability. And
Yeah.
I went to the West Bank about 3.5, 4 years ago, and I
Hmm.
went with veterans of the U.S. military to
Hmm.
meet with veterans of the Israeli military, members of Breaking the Silence, an organization committed to ending the occupation.
A great group, by the way, a great group.
Wonderful group. I mean, just
Yeah.
outstanding individuals. We met with Israeli journalists, we met with Israeli human rights scholars, we met with Palestinian journalists, Palestinian human rights scholars, and we got to see kind of firsthand what life is like for Palestinians, whether it was
Mhm.
in Ramallah or South Hebron or Jerusalem. And the only word you can think of is apartheid. You
Yeah.
have certain highways that only Israelis can drive on. Otherwise, you get pulled over and arrested. You have certain roads that only Israelis can walk on. Otherwise, you get detained immediately.
Hmm.
Even though I was with a delegation of U.S. military veterans and Israeli veterans, we were stopped at multiple points at gunpoint, forced off of buses. They took our phones, made us delete the pictures we had taken in the West
Oh,
Bank, under threat
wow.
of arrest. I have a photo of me, scrambling through my bag trying to find my papers because I was stopped at gunpoint. The only one. I was the only
Yeah.
Muslim in this delegation, and they stopped me at gunpoint and said, "Show us your papers." And then, to be fair, at another location, they stopped all of us at gunpoint and asked us for our papers.
Hmm.
And I want to emphasize to those watching this that we are in a military occupied land that does not belong to the Israeli government, does not belong to
Right.
Israel. And they are there. So, Congress, that's been my experience there.
Yeah.
It was, on one hand, powerful to see the resilience of the Palestinian people. It was inspiring to see these ancient historic sites that we read about in the Bible seem like firsthand.
Yeah.
So heartbreaking to see how much pain is there. And I wanted to segue that into this question.
Yeah.
Do you see a connection? Because I do, of the fact that this government has funded a regime of Netanyahu that has killed more than 300 journalists and is now also attacking journalists and satirists here at home. And so to me, that's why it's so important. That's why Dr. King said, injustice
Yeah.
anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Do you see
Yes.
that same connection, or do you think I'm making it too tenuous?
No, well, I mean, let's face it, Benjamin Netanyahu is their version of Donald Trump in many
Yeah,
ways. Although I think Benjamin Netanyahu has been more bloodthirsty. It would probably be the biggest difference.
yeah,
But there's no question. When you look at the lack of, I mean, it's really the wannabe authoritarians, the totalitarian sort of response of some leaders. And I think, unfortunately, Netanyahu shares that. Also, Netanyahu stays out of prison by staying in power. He's got extra
right.
incentive to be awful. But the international courts have said he's a war criminal and he should be charged as such. Instead, we have members of Congress going for photo ops with him.
Yeah,
I don't know
crazy.
many people, trying to get in line to go with a mass murder in the United States, and yet, this is part of what happened. So that is really troubling. There's no question. But I think the West Bank, looking at the illegal settlements
Yeah,
and the expansion, many times U.S. citizens going there and being part of that, and then attacking these communities. And we had the situation right now. There's a young man. I'm gonna forget his last name. His first name is Muhammad, who is 16 years old, being held, just taken out of his home. And we're trying to fight for his release because there is no charges. There's nothing on there, and we've had other people that have been killed in similar situations or die in prison.
yeah,
This kid right now has got scabies. He's lost a third of his body weight, and I think there's a renewed interest by many members of Congress to try to do something. But in the West Bank. So for all of the conversations, the awful, awful conversations about what's happening in Gaza, that's also happening in the West Bank.
Yep.
And that's why US supporting this, supporting Netanyahu's government is a problem. And let me just add one thing because the last time I was there, we had dinner at someone's house and they had young Palestinians and Israeli kids working together. And I really think people on the ground there are far better than their elected leadership
Yep.
has been. And I think it's important to point that out because I really believe that everyone wants peace fundamentally because they want to not have bombs raining on them and they want to have bullets being shot at them, and it's just a common part of being a human. And I think there is promise still on the
Oh, I
ground,
agree.
but what I'm worried about is the devastation of Gaza at this point.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of really awful ideas on how to move forward.
Yeah, I know. I'm so glad you brought up the point about the West Bank because again, even prior to 10/7, in the year prior to 10/7, the Israeli government and Israeli settlers had killed 240 Palestinians in the West
Mhm.
Bank. There's no Hamas there. There's no Hamas
Yeah.
there. This is just, extrajudicial killing with no accountability. Certainly doesn't justify 10/7, and I'm not trying to excuse that in any respect. I'm just rejecting the narrative that this violence began at 10/7. It didn't.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
began well before then. Bringing things back home in the last few minutes of this conversation, we're facing a government shutdown pretty soon.
Yeah.
Potential.
Potentially.
Yeah. What do you think should happen? What do you want to see happen in this conversation?
Well, I think at least I can speak for House Democrats. All right, I've never tried to speak for House or Senate Democrats, but I can speak for House Democrats. We are very unified in that the damage done by the big ugly law. We want to see, especially around healthcare, overturned. So the cuts to Medicaid, the tax credits for healthcare through the Affordable Care Act, the other changes that affect rural hospitals, and so many other aspects of healthcare we want to see change, in addition to other things that were bad for people in our districts that happened in that bill, or else it's kind of a non-starter of a conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, it is only an extension until November, which is one thing. So what we got to see is what the Senate does, because when this happened in March, they told us they were going to fight with everything they got. And 72 hours later, I think some people thought they were on their bellies getting rubbed, or on their backs getting their bellies rubbed, right?
Yeah.
And I say that jokingly, but
You're right.
that was the observation that people had. So I'm hoping that the Senate can be stronger in realizing that the damage done by the legislation they've passed is significant. We should be fighting for that at minimum overturn. They haven't come to us to draft the CR. This is something they have done on their own. So really, any self-respect that you have, even if there's a crumb left, you should want to vote against this. And they're in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House, but they can't govern because they're a dysfunctional cult.
Yep.
So, I think Democrats just have to hold strong on behalf of our constituents. And I think that's how people see it. I mean, from the people you're talking to, what do you hear people want Democrats to do on this?
Here's what I'm hearing, Congressman, consistently. And if you look at the responses to the social media posts, and granted the internet is not real life, but even when I'm going to Democratic Party events, when I'm
Mhm.
canvassing for candidates, locally and nationally, the consistent answer I'm hearing is let Republicans own the shutdown. Stop
Yeah.
bailing them out. Let them own the shutdown. Let their constituents suffer the way we're suffering right now. People are angry. People are pissed off.
Yeah. Right. Right.
They can't get basic reproductive health care access. They can't get basic food access. They're being fired from their jobs. The jobs market is plummeting. Housing is atrocious. They're saying, hang this noose around Republican politicians by their own doing. Stop trying to save them. And let me be very clear. The analogy being given is Republicans have the news, let them hang themselves, stop trying to save them. And that's what I'm hearing across the board right now. Whether Chuck Schumer is going to, listen to what Democratic voters want or capitulate again, we'll find out. But I think that lack of confidence is there right now. I did want to, before we go, ask you one
Yeah.
more question about your home state of Wisconsin. There's going to be a
Mhm.
gubernatorial election, and
Yeah.
and I'm seeing some inspiring candidates. I'm in Illinois, so I don't have a vote, but I'm enamored by Francesca Hong because she's running a
Mhm.
people-funded campaign rejecting APEC money. But what's your thoughts on the gubernatorial campaign? I know you were vital in ensuring that billionaire influence in the last judicial election didn't work. What do you want to see in the next governor of Wisconsin?
Yeah, I really wish Tony Evers had run for re-election. I'll be honest, because
He's a great
one, he
guy.
was a good governor.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
actually the most decent person I truly think in politics. Maybe short of maybe Jim McGovern's a tie, but just a
yeah.
really decent person that you absolutely would love to have as your neighbor or your uncle. And we because we just got fair maps 2 years ago because of they thought the courts were going to draw them, so the legislature Republican majority had to give these fair maps that the governor had advocated for. We were down 15 seats in the assembly, and I think 6 or 7 in the Senate, and we picked up all 10 seats in the assembly and all but 2 in the Senate. So we're 5 in the assembly down, 2 in the Senate, and we can do that this cycle. And there's a congressional race, Derek Van Orden, who has proposed taking away funding from any entity that employs someone who criticized Charlie Kirk, which is just insane. It's Joe McCarthy coming back. We don't need more of that from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
There's a congressional seat that can help us flip the majority. We have a lot of really competitive things that we can do. And the governor's race, unfortunately, is going to be a bit of a distraction because it's going to suck up a lot of money in a primary and a lot of. I think if our attorney general runs, every single statewide office will be open, probably with some form of primary. So
Wow.
I'm torn because I would have loved to have not had to deal with that, just deal with the 5 seats, the 2 seat, and the one
Yeah.
seat. But Wisconsin is the home of Fighting Bob LaFollette, and you can see a little poster behind me. I think that's from 1924. Fighting Bob ran for president on the Progressive Party ticket, and his slogan was "Fearless and Incorruptible." Um, I want every elected politician to have that slogan, right? To
Love that. Yeah.
the Republicans are as corrupt as possible. I think that's an election issue going into next year. And be fearless. Just get out there. People want you to, even if they disagree with you on a few issues. The fact that they know you're never going to sell them out or see how the wind is blowing, you're just going to do what you think is the right thing, goes really far. So that's my hope. I don't know what are you hoping for next year with Democrats across the board?
Look, I think I just want the party to lean into what their base wants.
Yeah.
Run on these, even the phrase progressive to me is kind of a misnomer because to me it's a pretty moderate thing to say nobody should go bankrupt because they don't have health care. Or
Yeah.
that we should have clean air, food, and water for our children in the next generation. So let's have meaningful climate justice. So I want the party to fight. I want them to be fearless. I'll say this very candidly. Kamala Harris in her book said that her top pick was Pete Buttigieg, but she didn't go with him because she didn't think America was ready for a gay vice president. Now, I liked Tim Walz. I think he did a phenomenal job. But I think that is what kind of differentiates Republicans and Democrats. The Republicans
Yeah.
are like, let's find the most unqualified podcast bro and make him the FBI director in chief.
Yes.
And Democrats are like, let's poll test every single thing,
Yeah.
not take any risks whatsoever, and play it safe and hope that people like our timidness. Like, no, be fierce.
No. Yeah.
Go out there. If Harris thought Buttigieg was the right guy, go with him. Like, run with
Yeah.
him. Why? So that's why. If there's one thing I want to see, I want you to show other Democrats what it's like to be fearless and to lead from the front, speak with confidence and conviction, and then live your values, as opposed to being this poll-tested, APAC-driven, corporate outlet that just doesn't give the confidence that the country needs right now.
Yeah, I'll just add one final thing. At some point, I hope we, the broader progressive community, figures out how to make it so that someday, if you get endorsed by APAC, it actually works against you, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's not a group advocating for uh, the common good. It's right now really a pro Netanyahu group and
right,
complete blind eye to what's
right.
happening to people, and we need to make it actually be a liability.
Completely agree. Just like the NRA became, right, through
Yeah,
enough advocacy and efforts, and I think we'll get
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Congressman, truly a pleasure to have this conversation with you. We hope to have
Same.
this conversation again. Thank you for the work you're doing, and we'll have you back on soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the work you do, and I really enjoyed the conversation. And I love the joint podcast. This is great.
This is a lot of fun. Um, the Zach, so do you want to do the questions now that you were having?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So I'll just do a real quick introduction and just like a 3 minute answer to a question, if that's good.
perfect. Yep,
Okay.
perfect.
And Zach, are you got everything you need recording wise going? Oh, okay. So we'll
we're
get that.
recording,
Okay.
so we'll get you the quality.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, Alexa. Appreciate it. Okay. All right. So I'll just do a 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. With us today for one question is a human rights attorney, author, content creator, podcaster. We just did a podcast. Let's address this with Qasim Rashid. So glad to have Qasim Rashid with us today. Thank you for being here.
Congressman, a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Sure, thank you. So the one question I have for you is if you had the ability to change any one federal law, rule, whatever, without having to go through Mike Johnson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and everybody else, just you could make the change. What would that
Yeah.
change be, and why would you make that to be the single change you could do?
God, there's so many important policies. You can talk about healthcare, climate, immigration, foreign policy. There's so much. To me, fundamentally, I don't think you can get anywhere unless you have economic justice in this
Hmm.
country. And so the policy that I would change is I would enact a tax policy that abolishes billionaires and pegs the living wage to the minimum wage to an actual living wage. So somewhere around 25 to 30 bucks an hour right now, to
Hmm.
ensure that every person in this country has the financial means to provide for the food, shelter, water, healthcare, education, clothing that they need. Because every single study shows that when any society is economically sound with a strong working class base, then they become more innovative, crime
Hmm.
goes down, people live longer, they live healthier, and everything else becomes possible. But when people are struggling, like we are in this country right now, where 62% are living paycheck to paycheck, 1 in 6 are food insecure, 80% can't afford a $500 emergency, then it allows politicians to use culture wars to divide and distract and create fear. Crime goes up. It's a bad situation. So I would, if I could wave a magic wand, I
Hmm.
would pass a tax policy that we had between 1940 and 1980, where there was a 94%
Yeah.
marginal tax rate for the super wealthy,
Hmm.
where a single income home could provide for an entire home. Because I think that is a path towards racial, gender, and overall justice in this country.